Hi there, Sandy. I believe you have something to tell us regarding the elections?
Yes, I do. My name's Sandy Steele, and I stood as an independent candidate for the Cotswold constituency in 2011, 12 and 13, and I can tell you about how our the UK elections are comprehensively cartel frauded, and of course I discovered it locally to start off with, and then started to investigate further when I was investigated. And so I have the evidence.
Who were you investigated by?
By the local Gloucestershire CID,
Right.
An inspector, Ian Ginn, and Simon Shaw. When I laid a complaint, they came back and didn't actually register my complaint, and I was investigated. And in fact, actually,
To scare you off, presumably.
that would be how it seemed, and I think they'd been set up to do that. Rather than just simply registering my complaint, even if I was a nutter, they should have registered my complaint. And that really rather set me. I had a hunch that things were very wrong, but then I started to get the documents to find out about it. How they, the UK's elections are rigged by the mainstream national parties. And all of them are involved. This is Conservatives, the Labour, Liberal Democrat, UKIP and Green. And how they do it is they rig the local, they cartel fraud the UK's local elections using a technique called bid rigging cartel and market share cartels. That basically frauds local elections so that the candidates are in the mainstream national parties' pockets rather than in their local electors' pockets. And by doing that, it means that the mainstream national parties' executives control the whole of the political system. So people think that local elections are unimportant, but in fact they are the most critical ones, because that's where ordinary people would get involved. Unless the national parties are actually frauding the elections in their own candidates' favour and against any other candidates who might actually be representing both themselves and actually their local communities. I think the first thing is to just explain that I've got all the documents about the fraud for the Cotswold constituency, but these 103 documents simply are an example, and you would find, if you look into your own constituency, you would find these exact self-same frauds, comprehensive frauds being operated. The first document I want to introduce you to with regard to the Cotswold constituency frauds, there are 103 local council elections. And I had to threaten a freedom of information demand in order to get this first document, which is an extract. And what this document shows, which I've got here, and in fact I'll place it in front of you now, is, and it's on the back as well, this is actually an extract from the 2011 local elections, but the details are very, very similar for the 2015 local elections. And what this document shows is the elections, the names of each ward, and it also shows you the number of seats and the number of electors available. And if you look carefully, what you'll realise is there's an extraordinary variety of electors in each ward. So, for instance, I believe at the lowest level, we have got one ward with only 42 electors. I believe it's Caudle Green. Brimsfield Caudle Green ward has only 42 electors, and I believe it has 2 councillors. Whereas
Can we go up to see that? Which one is that?
It's about a third of the way down.
So, hang on, I'll just point to it. It's here.
Yeah.
Can you lift it up a tiny bit? And
Right.
forward. Brimsfield, 2 vacant seats and 42 electors. Yep.
And the highest examples at the other end in this constituency are, for instance, so that basically is one councillor per 20 or so electors. But you move to another local election, like, for instance, Cirencester Chesterton Ward, where you've got 2,904 electors in 2010.
Cirencester up a bit, please. So here, wait a minute.
2,900.
Cirencester Town, was it?
Chesterton.
Chesterton Ward. Yeah, so that's 3 vacant seats and
2,904.
2,904 electors.
Right.
Yeah.
And so these are the same level of, these are the most local elections. And you notice that in the towns, basically there's, at this 2011 elections, there were basically one councillor per 1,000 electors. Whereas when you get out into the rural areas, which are the wealthier areas, you are getting one councillor per 20 electors. But this is just the superficial fraud. This is just the fraud which then allows them to operate the more significant frauds underneath, which actually fraud the election. Because there are actually 2 types of fraud going on here. And they're distinguished because one fraud is suited to very, very small elections, which is the bid rigging cartel fraud, and the other one is suited to them supersizing the wards. Now you've actually seen the extraordinary size of difference in the local electorates. And incidentally, if you went to Swindon or down to Bristol, you'd find that the local electorates are 4,000-5,000 in Bristol. The local electorates are 10,000, even 15,000, and yet they have only got 2 or 3 councillors. So they've literally got one councillor often for 2 or 3 or 4,000, 5,000 electors at the local elections. Now, those larger, supersized wards, what they are doing there is they are making them so large that they essentially aren't local, and that means that the candidates are actually being coerced to join the mainstream national parties because to actually promote themselves into such a large ward as an independent would be very, very difficult. Whereas
what would they have to do to promote themselves? It would be like leaflet dropping, going door to door, speaking to people face to face, and I suppose if there's 10,000.
Well, even just 2,000 electors, it becomes very, very difficult for. It isn't essentially local because the candidates don't know the electors don't know the candidates, and of course, the mainstream parties already have brand, they have a profile, whereas anyone who's actually trying to represent simply their own local ward and actually write policies actually for their ward is going to have to just do the whole profile themselves. They're going to have to do the printing themselves, they have to do the distributing, they're going to have to actually write their own manifestos, and they'll have to actually raise their profile, sending out leaflets, maybe 3 or 4 hits. And the mainstream parties know that that's very difficult. So simply by supersizing
also
wards,
financially, I would suppose
it's difficult financially. Whereas the mainstream national party candidates, if they stand locally, they will get actually funds to, and even actually the leaflets formatted so that basically the national executive of their parties will be telling the electors what they want, and then the local national party candidate will just simply add, well, and I'm going to do something about dustbins or that sort of thing. Now, that fraud is called a market share cartel fraud because they're supersizing wards so that essentially only mainstream national parties are likely even to take part and or win. And that is fraud. It's misleading. They're still presenting these to be our local elections, but they know that in fact by supersizing them, they are getting them actually biasing these elections to be absolutely in their favour, their candidates' favour. And that means that the locals and the individual has lost all control over their local government or over their government entirely. And national executives are therefore controlling local politics by that fraud.
So that kind of that's people who don't live in your local area most likely, so therefore they're not going to care so much what happens in that area.
Well, they don't live very locally, but obviously they are anonymous people who essentially the electors don't really know because the wards are that sufficiently large that there is a loss of individual knowledge about these people. So they're simply sounding as national elections. The rural elections are frauded in a different way, where they come down to these very small elections, which I've just shown you. The candidates, generally the rural areas are dominated by the Conservatives, but the other parties collude in this because they are up to this fraud in the cities, this different fraud in the cities. In the rural local elections, what the candidates are told by the mainstream parties, particularly the Conservative Party, obviously in the rural areas, is not to declare their party, or their party political membership, their party political support, their party political association, and not to declare their policies, any policies at all, and not to, or little or nothing, and not to run any public primaries, where they would have to actually sit around and actually provide a policy, and then not run any public hustings where there would be publicly questions about their absence of any party political declaration and absence really of any manifestos at all. So this is sewn up, and that's called a bid rigging cartel. This is where they're coordinating, undeclared parties are coordinating to cartel or control that election. And of course, if anyone else stands, they can then covertly campaign against that person. And in fact, they will covertly campaign against anyone who's actually starting to articulate what the locals really would want. So that is the explanation, but the proof is actually in these 103 election results.
Can we have a closer look at that, please?
I will. Yeah, I'll go through them one by one in a minute and show that without exception there is reasonable evidence that each one is being comprehensively frauded by the mainstream national parties in their favour and against any other candidates.
Okay, great, Sandy. We'll have to leave it there for part one. See you again for part two, we hope. And we'll try and explain it as well with analogies. For some people hearing this the first time, it's quite a lot to get your head around, I suppose. So we'll have a go at simplifying it for you in part two. Thanks very much.